Mindbender at Galaxyland is one of the trickier roller coasters for enthusiasts to experience. Edmonton, Canada isn't a city most enthusiasts visit. If you're planning a coaster trip to Edmonton, it's exclusively for Mindbender. There really isn't another major theme park nearby. I made a trip to the West Edmonton Mall primarily for Mindbender, and I was not disappointed in the least bit. Mindbender opened in 1985, and it still holds the record for the tallest and longest indoor roller coaster in the world. Mindbender stands a whopping 145 feet or 44 meters tall, and it looks colossal in the back of Galaxyland. TMNT Shellraiser did dethrone Mindbender in the speed department, but it fell 3 feet short on the height and roughly 1,000 feet short on the length. Back to Mindbender, but it looks extremely imposing with the massive vertical loops, and also because the largest drops extend into the rafters of the roof. Galaxyland's roof is angled upwards specifically to accommodate Mindbender. And the coaster sounds threatening too, as it fills the park with a deafening and echoing roar whenever it cycles a train. Built by Anton Schwarzkopf, Mindbender is an enlarged mirror clone of his earlier creation in La Feria de Chapultepec's Chimera, which was previously known as Magnum Force at Flamingo Land, the Triple Loop coaster at Sunway Lagoon, or Dreier Looping on the German Fair circuit. Mindbender is extremely similar to Chimera. The layouts are nearly identical, except Mindbender has an extra helix towards the end. But unfortunately, there is another similarity that Mindbender shares with Chimera. Both were involved in lethal derailments. In June of 1986, Mindbender had the back car derail during the third and final loop. This caused the car to slam into a concrete pillar, damaging the car. This caused the lap bars to unlock, throwing all 4 riders into the concrete, leading to the unfortunate deaths of 3 of the riders. The root cause of the accident was a faulty wheel assembly. The ride was not properly maintained due to issues translating the German maintenance manual. Mindbender did reopen the following year, and it has run without incident ever since. However, several redundant safety measures were put in place that are to the detriment of future riders. 1. The trains were reduced from 4 cars to 3 cars. This reduced the coaster's capacity 25% and reduced the coaster's overall momentum. 2. Each car had the number of wheel assemblies increased from 2 to 4. In order to do this, Mindbender's trains were comprised of 3 Schwarzkopf lead cars chained together. 3. Schwarzkopf loopers are designed to run with just lap bars. The strong G's in the loops naturally keep riders in their seats. After the accident, though, seatbelts were added. These do not impact the ride in my opinion. The other restraint that was added does impact the ride, and that would be the accordion-style shoulder harnesses. There are 2 ways to position the harness. Both have their pros and cons, depending on your personal preference. The first is to keep the shoulder pads high. The benefit here is that you'll have some clearance between your shoulders and the restraint. This gives you more freedom. The downside is that you will likely hit your head several times due to the snappy transitions that this coaster has. The second is to press the shoulder pads tightly against your shoulders. This will really lock you into place and they can dig into your shoulders. But it will allow your head to clear the top of the shoulder pads, which will eliminate the head banging. I much prefer this option, even if it does make the already cramped cars feel a bit claustrophobic. Now let's talk about the operations of this coaster. To put it bluntly, they are awful. One of the other mitigations from the accident is increased inspections for Mindbender. There were 3 scheduled inspections over the course of the day for this coaster, and then you have upwards of 10-minute dispatches. The ride had 2 trains and 2 operators, but in one of the most bizarre operational policies I've ever seen, each operator owns their own train. What this means is that one operator sits off to the side while the other operator admits guests, checks restraints, and dispatches their train. It didn't seem very efficient to me. Why you'd have one operator sit off to the side doing nothing while one operator is loading the other train made no sense to me. And further, they often wouldn't load the train until the prior one completed its run, making dispatches even more anemic. That's one piece of the puzzle. The other are all the restraints I mentioned earlier. Riders are not allowed to adjust their own restraints, so the operator will take 30 to 45 seconds per person to adjust these click by click, soliciting feedback from riders at every click if it's tight enough. Thankfully, the ride was a 2 to 3 train wait at most, and I was there on a weekend. And the staff was really friendly. I know they were just following the park's policies. Before delving into my personal experience on Mindbender, I want to note that the park often reverses the back car. This was not being done during my visit. While I definitely wish I could have experienced this intense coaster in reverse, it probably would have been extremely nauseating and made it difficult to marathon in the back car. And on that note, Mindbender can be tricky to marathon as is. That's especially true if you're bothered by the restrictive restraints or positive Gs. Mindbender pulls a whopping 5.2 Gs at the maximum. And this is not a fleeting moment. Mindbender has several high G spots, and those forces are fairly sustained as well. Mindbender begins with a 145-foot tall curving booster wheel lift. You come mere feet from the ceiling, and then you sharply plunge 180 degrees towards the ground. Everyone who has ridden Mindbender praises this coaster for the inversions, and rightfully so. But these drops are very underrated. They are surprisingly steep, and the ridiculously tight curve yields a free fall sensation if you're sitting towards the back. I wouldn't quite say it gives airtime though, because of the extremely restrictive restraint system boxing you in, but you do get some laterals. That being said, the intense snap of these drops is why I preferred Mindbender in the back row. You then twist back up and are treated to some very strong laterals. You then go over a gentle dip before traveling down another giant swooping drop. This one isn't as steep as the first, but the laterals are excellent because of how drawn out it is. That's followed by Mindbender's signature back-to-back vertical loops. And holy moly are these things intense. I believe this is where Mindbender hits the advertised 5.2 Gs, and I grade out on every ride. Experiencing not one but two circular Schwarzkopf loops consecutively is absolutely draining. These loops are every bit as forceful as people say, and the train rips through them. The only coaster in the US that feels similar is the two back-to-back loops on Six Flags Over Texas's Shockwave. You then rise back up into a mid-course brake run. For me, Mindbender whizzed right through this brake run, and on the other POVs I've seen, it seems to do the same thing there as well. You then crawl over another dip, and then sharply plummet back to the ground. This drop felt like a smaller version of the first drop. It was equally as snappy. You then rise back up, navigate yet another little dip, and hit another mid-course brake run. This one does trim the train ever so slightly though. This isn't Chimera that runs brakeless. The fourth drop is similar to the second one. It's not super steep, but it has an elongated twist down to the ground with some great laterals the whole way. That leads into the third and final loop. This loop feels just as intense as the first two, but the gray out wasn't quite as pronounced since it was just a single loop as opposed to two back-to-back. The other cool thing with this loop is that there's an amazing head chopper with a pathway that runs through the middle of it. My biggest criticism with a lot of the Schwarzkopf loopers is that they can sometimes mail it in after the final inversion. That's my biggest issue with Olympia looping. Thankfully, Mindbender still has some things up its sleeve. You rise back up yet again expecting another brake run, but instead you're treated to this surprise bunny hill with some great floater airtime throughout the train. You then rise up another tiny hill, getting another quick pop of airtime, before twisting 180 degrees downwards. Now, this doesn't feel like a drop. There's no airtime nor positive Gs. Rather, it feels like half a helix. But you then zip across the ground and navigate a 540 degree upwards helix. This helix isn't overly forceful, but it's extremely disorienting. This helix wraps around a mirrored support column, and the reflections cause a mind-bending effect if you look inwards. You then cruise into the brake run, ending the ride. So what would I rate Mindbender? I would give this coaster a 9.5 out of 10. Mindbender is absolutely wild. The initial sequence of twisting drops and vertical loops offers a combination of whip, laterals, and positive Gs matched by very few coasters. The ride does let up on the forces at the very end, instead offering that cool visual with the mirrored support column. But in general, the ride is great start to finish. Really, the biggest flaw with this ride are those awful operations that are caused by the annoying restraint system. So how does Mindbender compare to the other Schwarzkopf Mega Loopers? The only one I prefer is Mindbender's little cousin in Mexico and Chimera. Both Mindbender and Chimera have similar first halves, but if you saw my review of Chimera, you know La Feria removed all the brake runs from that ride. This causes Chimera to run unnaturally fast in the second half, augmenting the already powerful Gs of the final loop and causing some unintended airtime and laterals. Meanwhile, Mindbender runs as designed, which isn't a bad thing considering how forceful that third loop still is, and you also have those 2 spots of airtime, plus that optically interesting final helix. So those are my thoughts on Mindbender at Galaxyland. If you're a fan of Schwarzkopfs or positive Gs, this coaster needs to be on your bucket list. What are your thoughts on this coaster? I would love to hear what you think about Mindbender down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate if you gave this video a like and considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.